So, I heard you're looking for a go-to source for entertainment.
Wait for it.
Gaming?
Wait for it.
Anime?
Plus Ultra!
Mr. Eric Almighty and Phil the Filipino? Yeah, they've got you covered. And all you gotta do is wait for it. This is the Wait For It podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wait For It podcast. I am your co-host Phil Smith, aka Phil the Filipino. And joining me as always is your other co-host, Mr. Eric Almighty. And Eric, we are here with the... Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wait For It podcast. I am your co-host Phil Smith, aka Phil the Filipino. And this is the March edition of Late to the Party with my co-host, Mr. Eric Almighty. I meant to do it over again. The same exact way.
I'm so scared. I was off. I'm going to be honest with you. Let's just pause. Time out. Because I was off tab, and I came back after you did that. It was just a moment of silence. I was so disoriented. So I think it's just, let's just time out, and let's just start. What did you do? What did you mess up?
Nothing. I was redoing it as if it was the day was resetting.
All right, I guess keep it in. I'm tired. I'm tired already. That scared me. I wasn't paying attention. You need to warn me.
I wasn't going to warn you because you haven't inhaled alien semen like I have or something, or whatever happens in the movie. It's all very up in the air. But anyway, as you can see in the title, this is the March edition of Late to the Party, and we watched Edge of Tomorrow, or Live, Die, Repeat, whichever one you want to call it, because that was kind of up in the air during the entire process. We're going to talk about that as we navigate through this episode. But Eric, a film that has definitely been on my radar for a while. You actually, I think, watched it last year or within the last couple of years, and a film that's definitely developed a huge cult following. So if there is anything negatively said about this film, I'm sure we'll get ripped to shreds on TikTok, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But it's going to be an exciting conversation nonetheless for, again, what has become a very, very popular sci-fi action film, and I think, honestly, for good reason.
Yeah, Edge of Tomorrow is a movie that is not a cult classic, but it is one of those films that people really enjoy if you've seen it. And I happen to be one of those people. So when Phil brought up, hey, I've been kind of thinking of watching Edge of Tomorrow, I was like, yeah, that's a good one for this series in particular. And it's kind of funny, Phil, because we talked about this in the pre-show on Patreon. We talked about the tagline I'm going to give this movie, which essentially is Helldivers the movie, Groundhog Day. And that is absolutely what this movie is in a nutshell. And it's kind of funny because we're covering Helldivers later this month as a game, but if it had a movie, this is definitely what it would look like.
Yeah, that's definitely what I thought of immediately, and we're going to talk about like the suits and, the whole look and feel of the film as well, so don't want to jump too far ahead before we, have that conversation, but want to welcome in any brand new listeners and returning listeners to the Way Forward podcast. This is our monthly edition, as I mentioned, of Late to the Party, and, it's this month is, again, as we, every single month, this always creates a really, really good conversation, and sometimes it goes really well, and sometimes, like I mentioned before, TikTok just has their way with us, so we'll see how it goes this month, but I feel like, again, people are going to be mostly accepting of what we have to say about this film, so, with that being said, Eric, let's just jump right into it. If you are brand new to the podcast, make sure you stick around to the very end, and we'll let you know where you can find all the rest of our content, but let's give a very, very quick synopsis of this film. Now, it is based, I believe, off of a graphic novel, a Japanese novel called All You Need Is Kill by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. A soldier fighting aliens gets to relive the same day over and over again, the day restarting every time he dies. And it is starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, as well as Bill Paxton, which it was very nice to see him, and Brendan Gleeson, always great to see him as well. It was directed by Doug Liman, Eric, who I believe also directed what's the Bourne films, the original Bourne Identity films. So huge pedigree when it comes to the actors and the director, people that were involved in this film. And, you know, the thing that I had kind of like put me off on watching this initially is because it kind of went through production hell. I was watching through a couple of videos before we recorded here this evening about how literally, I think Doug Liman had mentioned like 2/3 of the screenplay was ripped up and started all over again about 8 weeks before filming. It also has, you know, I made the joke about Live, Die, Repeat, because that was, I think, the name of the film when it released on Blu-ray and DVD. Edge of Tomorrow, it also was a film like people didn't really know what it was about. It came out in a very, very interesting time frame as far as 2014 as well. There were a bunch of sequels coming out. I think there was like a Transformers film, like a Marvel film, a bunch of things coming out right around that time. And it's tough to release original IPs that people had never heard of. So I think the fact that this even came out and does have the success that it does now is an accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah, 100%. And that is kind of like the vibe, Phil, that was going on at the time as far as this movie. It was kind of just a multitude of feelings because of the movies that were releasing. Obviously, Tom Cruise is the lead actor. So just to kind of name off a couple of films that came out around that time, Phil, was, we'll kind of go in a 5-year span. Valkyrie, Night and Day, Jack Reacher, and Oblivion were several movies that came out. So, like, these were like those, like it was, I don't want to say it was the Tom Cruise resurgence, because he never really exactly dropped off, but there was that period of time where, are we going to keep watching Tom Cruise outside of Mission Impossible? That was a talk. There's a lot of stuff about Tom Cruise we're not going to talk about on this episode, but that has to be factored in too. And I feel like this movie, Phil, in the middle of that somewhat resurgence, this movie was perfectly placed for him as a lead actor. And that's what audiences came to see when they went to theaters. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't really know that that was going to be the case just based off of how it was going.
Yeah, it didn't necessarily have the greatest box office showing. I know as far as its opening weekend, it didn't do very well, but it did have a little bit of a resurgence over the next couple of weeks just because of word of mouth. I think the word started to get out that this was a very, very solid, again, sci-fi action film. And I think, again, sci-fi can be a tough genre to kick the door in. So, yeah, like you said, you know, I think, you know, while we're not going to talk about it, I think the kind of, especially around that time, the general feeling about Tom Cruise is people were feeling a little iffy about him despite the rest of the excellent cast. And, you know, that's what, you know, as far as Tom Cruise goes, as far as performance-wise, I'll talk about that a little bit later here in the episode. But, you know, it is kind of a bummer that, like, I mean, I know that you obviously haven't watched the film, and, you know, you'll maybe watch it down the line, but, you know, I talk about Pacific Rim a lot, and Pacific Rim, while it is very campy, there's a lot of goofy stuff in there. It's such an original kaiju mech film that, like, I think it deserved a lot more love, and I feel like Edge of Tomorrow was kind of in that same boat when it comes to the people that very, very vehemently defend this film. And you know what, I totally get it. As far as things that we liked, I mean, obviously, the most important, one of the most important parts of this film is the beach scene, because they spent months filming there, and that whole thing, Eric, I enjoyed the hell out of that. Even, like, you think it would get obviously repetitive, that's just the whole nature of the movie, but it's awesome. I mean, stuff happens, obviously different things are happening each and every single time. It's definitely very violent for a PG-13 film, right? It is rated PG-13, right? Yeah. I wonder, like, what kind of envelope they could have pushed if it was rated R, but they probably would have made even less money, so that probably wasn't the right play. But the beach scene in general, I mean, right out of the gate, had me hooked. And, you know, when it comes to the action, Edge of Tomorrow, definitely top tier.
Yeah, and Phil, I think the thing that surprised me about the movie, and I'd be curious to hear your perception of it, was the fact that it was a lot funnier than I was expecting it to be. Like, the comedy was absolutely played up with the Groundhog Day-like scenario, and obviously the sci-fi elements of it all kept the story intriguing, but those two elements just seemed to be a perfect match. Was that something you were expecting based off of clips or trailers you have seen? Again, this movie came out in 2014. So not only are we going to speak pretty openly about the film on this episode, but, you know, going into it, you had to have seen something. So I'm curious, what was your kind of mindset going into it?
Yeah, no, it definitely has a lot of really solid humor. And, you know, I'm not the biggest Tom Cruise fan myself. You know that. But, you know, I kind of wish like I hadn't known this going into the movie. I guess I'm jumping a little bit ahead because I do feel like Tom Cruise, while he was very good in this, I do think he was a little miscast. They actually initially had offered this role to Brad Pitt, and I've always thought Brad Pitt is certainly a lot funnier. We've seen him in a lot of things, but also like Tom Cruise has been incredibly funny. Like we quote Tropic Thunder all the time, and he is incredible in that. And so he definitely has the chops to do so. I've just never really been the biggest fan of his. But, you know, between the supporting cast, Team J or Group J, whatever they're referred to as, really solid. I mean, anytime you just got Emily Blunt just repeatedly murdering the same person over and over again, I think that's pretty funny. So, yeah, again, going into it because we're 10 years removed now from the film, just kind of word of mouth hearing that it's definitely going to surprise you in a lot of ways, and yeah, it certainly did.
And I definitely think surprise is the right word, because this movie just again felt like it came out of nowhere. No one was talking about it, and only people that have been like that saw it really when it initially came out still talk about it today. So it just seems like one of those under the radar movies, despite the fact that a sequel has been kind of thrown out there many times, as recently as in the last couple months, if I recall. I definitely remember hearing something earlier this year about the potential with Tom Cruise and the deal that he struck, I think with Paramount, but I could be wrong on that. But he struck some type of deal, and it came up in conversation. So I would definitely be curious to hear your thoughts on if you think that would be necessary. We'll get there, though, I'm sure, eventually. I want to
talk about the ending.
Yeah, we got to talk about the ending, and I do want to ask, because I definitely think you have more gripes about this film than I do. Again, I thought the movie was pretty well done from start to finish, but that ending is definitely not controversial, but definitely some people are impartial to it. So where did you end up on the spectrum? For me, it didn't ruin the movie for me, but I can also admit it wasn't strong. So what were your thoughts on the ending? And we're going to talk openly about it. So again, if for some reason you haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow, there's your warning.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, you know, once because it's a 2-hour long film, so, you know, an hour, and we're probably like an hour 40 in when the final the final part takes place. And first off, I wasn't the biggest fan of excuse me, I wasn't the biggest fan of the design of the alien. You know, maybe that's a personal thing. I'd be interested to see how you felt about it. So like every time they popped up, like it wasn't necessarily like I was supposed to fear them, but I didn't. It was like I was looking like at a mouth with like spaghetti legs. You know what I mean? Like just that's all they were. It was just a mouth and metal arms and legs, and so I wasn't necessarily like really afraid of them. So again, when you just throw a whole bunch of them at us in the finale of the scene, I wasn't necessarily like feeling the whole like feeling that this. I guess the stakes didn't feel as high. They weren't really there for me, even though I knew the whole fate of the world depended on this essentially suicide mission. You know, everybody in the group essentially loses their lives, but I just didn't think they did, I don't know, and the best job of explaining why the Omega gave you these powers, and like why did it reset 3 days before? Are they in an alternate timeline? Did it just subconsciously allow him to choose when he gets to come back and restart? The Emily Blunt and Tom Cruise kiss was unscripted. She did that off script, so that it wasn't necessarily a romantic thing. It was like a, hey, you know, thanks for all of this type of thing. So I guess it didn't really bother me too much, but yeah, it was just like, I don't think the ending is confusing, but it's like, why? And maybe that's something they explore in a sequel, but again, we'll talk about whether or not that's warranted or whether or not I think that's warranted. We'll see. What did you think? You didn't rewatch it, right? Before this?
No, but I did kind of freshen up on the plot, and surprisingly, I remember a lot of the visuals from this movie. But this movie's a brisk hour 53. I definitely feel like for the criticisms you're giving it, I feel like it could have maybe benefited from at least another 15 to 20 minutes of film time, you know? And that's always easier to say looking back on it all, but when you look at this movie, like, I enjoyed it from start to finish, but that ending is a little bit, maybe lackluster is not the word. I would say the third act might be the weakest out of it all. And again, I think it's because you're immediately in love with the charm of this movie initially, the difference, the new feel that it has to a existing genre. And then on top of that, you have really good performances. I know you said Tom Cruise was miscast, but I do like Tom Cruise. Emily Blunt, star in this film. I think this was the start of very much for her. She, turned out to be pretty great. Bill Paxton is in it, and, favorite of the podcast, Brendan Gleeson, our own Banshee of Inisherin here. So, again, I thought the main cast was great. I thought the premise was great. But yeah, that third act definitely is maybe the weaker because of that. And again, I think more runtime could have helped there.
I just don't like you, Cage. Well, that makes sense because you didn't like me yesterday either. So it's totally different. Yeah,
I would do anything to watch Colin and Brendan Groundhog Day, Banshees of Inisherin. Let's do it.
No, I don't want that at all. So I will push back on that. But yeah, I think, again, knowing that this was offered to Brad Pitt, and he probably turned it down because he was also filming World War Z, which is, just a whole other conversation when we talk about movies. But yeah, I think I would have probably liked him more in this role because I just don't buy into Tom Cruise being a out of place savior because of the roles that he has played. He's very competent and very capable in the Mission Impossible films, even though I haven't seen any of them. I know that he is, obviously very capable in those. And I just didn't buy into him in this very short amount of time. Now, first off, we don't know the exact amount of times that he has died. We don't really get that number, but considering how many days it takes to master a skill, it just doesn't seem like enough time. And listen, this is all nitpicky math sciencey shit that people can really dive into if you wanted to, but that's probably part of it as well. And listen, would Brad Pitt have been a convincing person as far as what he looks like and what the other films he's been in? I think this was offered to Brad Pitt because I think Doug Liman also directed Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if I recall correctly, while I was researching this. So reuniting those two together probably would have been good. But I can admit this is probably a lot of Tom Cruise bias as time has gone on. I think I've definitely appreciated him for his work a lot more, especially again in Mission Impossible. But Emily Blunt is just so strong and so badass in this that that just covers a lot of probably what if he didn't have a good partner in crime in this, I maybe would have been a little bit more harsh in the film. But she is just so cool. That character is so awesome. And and also the Team J, like we talked about. There's a lot of, although I can't remember what character it was. I'm looking at IMDb. There was one I think it was Nance, who had the worst Southern accent, the worst fake Southern accent I think I have ever heard in film. It was so bad, and I couldn't. And Bill Paxton was a country guy from Kentucky, and she had a worse accent than him. So other than that, though, supporting cast really good. Cinematography, visuals, very good. Practical suits, which is awesome. I think that was definitely a good call. You probably you avoid the kind of maybe jankiness of a CGI suit. So really cool that they went practical.
Yeah, and again, the movie in general, I think was just, you said it earlier, a surprise. I think it was just a surprise hit in a way for most people that got to see it, but the results just never showed. And I think as the movie has aged, it has definitely had a little bit more appreciation. Phil, as we kind of, transition into the discussion of, how the movie scored, what did we think of it? Is there anything else about the movie that you thought was kind of noteworthy to bring up? Again, we've kind of just touched the surface of what this film offers. We've spoken pretty openly about it, but not too in depth. Again, this movie came out in 2014. If you're checking out this episode, you just want to hear our thoughts. Maybe you're one of those people like me. Again, one of the 5 people that saw Edge of Tomorrow in theaters here in Jacksonville when it came out. But again, just out of curiosity, Phil, anything else you want to touch on that was standout, positive or negative in the film?
What did you think of the alien design? I didn't hear that.
That is right. Yeah. We went on a whole separate tangent. I meant to mention that. The mimics were unsettling, but like not in a scary way. So I agree with you. I was never like terrified of them. I just didn't like the way they moved. Like that was definitely like the thing about them that I think was probably the most creepy is not the word, but unsettling is what I would say.
I think the mimic design maybe works better in a video game. I think that would. I think that would be really cool. But in the movie, and listen, the visuals of this movie, it still looks good. It's aged pretty well, I would say. So I think it would look better there. There actually is a kind of a character in Horizon Zero Dawn in the Horizon Zero universe that actually does kind of look like the mimic. So maybe that's why I was kind of like underwhelmed by him, because I had kind of seen something like that already, which isn't necessarily unfair. Horizon came out in 2017, like 3-4 years after this. But
you just wanted to bring up Horizon Zero Dawn randomly.
Yeah, you guys should also play Horizon Zero Dawn. Shout out to Aloy. Oh, there we go. Shout out to Aloy right there. But yeah, I think overall, I was certainly surprised by it. I definitely wish I had watched it sooner, and this would have been, I think, a really good movie to see in theaters. Big visuals, big sound. I think it would have made for a good popcorn summer blockbuster time.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So we can move on to the general response to the film, as we mentioned in terms of the box office numbers. They were, a little bit all over the place. I didn't get off to the best start, but I mean, as of right now, in terms of scores, as of obviously here in 2024, 10 years removed from the film, it does have a 91% tomato meter score from critics and a 90% audience score, which didn't surprise me. Again, I think this has definitely gained a huge following in the years that it's released. And you know what, Eric? I think it's definitely of the sci-fi films of the era, other than Pacific Rim, which is my favorite. I do think this is probably the best. You look at Battle for Los Angeles, awful. What was the other? There was another movie that Doug Liman had directed, another sci-fi film that I think it was not Jumper, but maybe it was Jumper. I can't remember. But think of those sci-fi movies that came out at this time. This is most likely the best one, other than, again, my personal bias with Pacific Rim. So I think it's definitely aged very, very well. So that leads us to, our Letterboxd scores. Eric, I think what you have to ask for me is, did I enjoy this more than Real Steel? Because Real Steel is my tentpole now. For
Jesus Christ, dude. We're going to have to just do Real Steel so we can just get over it, dude. I'm so done. I have a clip from What Did I Miss where Real Steel was brought up. That's going to go on TikTok, and I hate myself for it. I just don't want to talk about it anymore.
Wait till the comments flood in for all the Real Steel heads.
We'll just do Real Steel next then. That's fine. It's fine. I'll just watch it.
Oh, man. What a good movie. Oh, well, I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore. You might have missed it.
I'll fucking pay for it at this point.
I'll buy it for you.
That's fine.
For
you
Christmas.
probably already have the fucking DVD. You just haven't said anything.
Oh, I should get it. I should get a bunch of copies of Real Steel on DVD. But as far as the Letterboxd scores, Eric, I'll go first. I gave it a 3. I think it did teeter between a 3 and a 3.5. It's definitely no lower than that for sure. Again, I think it's aged very well, but I think between the third act, between me not being the biggest fan of Tom Cruise and also not buying into Tom Cruise as this hesitant savior, I guess that's the word that I'll put to it, but between Emily Blunt, honestly, between because of Emily Blunt's performance, I could probably bump it up to a 3.5, but like 3.5 is where I landed, which, if you are curious, is the same score I gave Real Steel, but it's also still better than a movie I watched recently called What Happened to Monday, which Twitter, for some reason, has like this love obsession for, and I watched it. It's fine. Just to give you, I'll give you an extra late to the party here, inside late to the party. What Happened to Monday? It's fine. You guys are, calm down. But this, Edge of Tomorrow, certainly worth your time. Live, Die, Repeat, much better name for the film. They should have gone with that.
Maybe, I guess. I don't know. I guess, like, looking back on it, they did also change it for a reason, once it released on DVD or Blu-ray. So I gotta say, and just for those of you at home, the average Letterboxd score is a 3.8 on about 1,700 ratings, which is fitting for this movie. I can't imagine there's a ton of ratings out there. But I'm closer to that than Phil at a 3.5. I enjoyed this movie a little bit more. 3.5. I'm going to definitely sit down and watch parts of this movie if it's on. I'm not quite at the point. Obviously, I haven't watched it again since it released. So I'm not putting this movie on actively at a 4 or higher, right? But if you have it at a 4, like I wouldn't fully argue with you on that. I think that's the ceiling, though. This movie definitely, again, just doesn't finish as strong as it starts. And if that's the case for you, I could see why, your score is what it is. But overall, Phil, this movie, for the most part, especially from like a critic audience standpoint on Rotten Tomatoes, very, very reasonable.
Yeah, I think so. And like you said, I'm not going to argue with anybody if you gave this a 4, because I think at that time, when you're looking for, when everything is a sequel, even still now, 10 years later, everything is a sequel, everything is a remake. When something comes out that's original, it deserves to be applauded. And I think they accomplished that. I guess the last thing we'll talk about, Eric, before we wrap up, do you think this needs a sequel? I don't think so. I don't believe that a sequel is necessary. Maybe if you want to do a TV show within the same universe, but to just revisit this specific, this specific thing that's happening, with Mimic Blood and or whatever it is, and restarting the day, I don't really see this working or needing to happen again.
I do slightly disagree, only because I think this movie would have lended itself to the social media aspect of today. So when it came out in 2014, I don't think social media was what it was to get this movie buzzing the way that social media would today. And I think if they made a movie as good as the first Edge of Tomorrow, I think people would flock to theaters to see it. I think it could be a success for sure. And I just think because the ending is so vague and there are a lot of question marks on how things happened in the movie, I think there's more of a story to tell. Emily Blunt is a superstar. You could bring her back, bring Tom Cruise back, and you could bring in some additional stronger supporting cast. I don't know. I wouldn't be fully done with it, but if you also said this movie never made a return, I'm also not clamoring for it. So it's just a waiting game at this point. We'll see.
Because, I mean, this is like ripe for a TV show that goes to like Amazon Prime that has the same characters, but they cast new people. And that's absolutely what they should not do. But like, that's what they would do if it were like 2018. So like you said, if it is going to come back, hopefully they have the wherewithal to bring back Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. And Emily Blunt, I think as recently as a couple of years ago, stated like the sequel would just cost too much money. But I mean, with the way things are now in terms of how much money is being spent on these blockbusters and some of them being various levels of success. Honestly, if you can make Godzilla -1 on a $10 to $20 million budget, you should be able to make anything. So I don't want to hear it. If they really wanted to, they could make a sequel and make it watchable. The thing is, just I don't know that they would make the right decisions. Again, like I said, it's just ripe for an Amazon Prime or Hulu TV show where they recast, and that would be just the worst decision.
Yeah, or just another movie, which, Phil, I don't think you ever saw this Amazon movie with Chris Pratt called The Tomorrow War.
Tomorrow World, yeah, because it immediately said it was like, let's watch this next. I'm like, nope, I don't think so. Is that the same universe?
No, but it's not bad. It doesn't also have great reviews in general, But I'm not gonna lie to you. I watched it, and I did. I watched
Was that
it
a
when
pandemic
it came
watch?
out. It was. I watched.
I feel like pandemic movie Eric isn't the same person that you are now.
No, it was a rough time. But I'll just tell you this: it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. There was some entertainment value for sure. I feel like that is what The Edge of Tomorrow 2 could be, is the Tomorrow War, that's not a gleaming like endorsement.
Is there time travel in the Tomorrow War?
Basically, like yeah.
Do you even know?
No, if I remember correctly, I'm gonna say it. I don't care enough to go look it up. They get sent to a time period to fight these aliens. There is some time elements to it, but it's not exactly, I would say, time travel. I could also be wrong, because this is also a movie I never would watch again. So that movie is that movie is a 3, and I admit that's too high. A 3 out of 5.
I was gonna say there's no way it's a 3. You should go back and rewatch it. And
it's like a 2.85, but that's a specific decimal point that I can't grade on Letterboxd. So
no,
there you are.
No. Well, again, we fully expect people to jump into the mentions and tell us what a masterpiece Edge of Tomorrow is. Please let us know. We are more than open to civil conversation. If you enjoyed this movie, that is totally fine. We get it. And if you want to find the rest of our content, it's really easy to find. It's in the Linktree link in the show notes of this episode. You can find, as we said, our social media pages, the most important ones to keep up with being Instagram, TikTok, as well as our growing Discord community. And if you're listening to this episode on Wednesday or Thursday of this week, just so you guys know, we will be at CollectiveCon this weekend down in the Prime Osborne Convention Center here in Jacksonville, Florida. We actually have our very own panel on Sunday at noon, so right there in the middle of the day, and we'll be playing some games. We're going to try and possibly make Jeopardy work as far as internet permitting, but if we can't, we'll have plenty of other stuff to play, probably give away some prizes. Fingers crossed, maybe we'll have some tickets to give away to Bold Matsuri. We'll have a good time. But Eric and I, we will not be doing any of the Q&A panels. We'll still be there promoting Bold Matsuri, hanging out with our friends, hanging out with you, hopefully. And we're very, very much looking forward to it. All of our content can be found on pretty much any podcasting site that you guys, or podcast streaming site that you want to choose from. And if you want to support the podcast, you can do a couple of different things. One, head on over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, leave those 5-star reviews. Let people know that you are listening, and you can share our content, tag us, and let other people know to check us out. And that's all very, very appreciative. But if you find yourself wanting to support the show maybe a little bit extra and join a very exclusive community, Eric will let you know how you can do that.
So like we mentioned before, we have a lot of free options to be able to join our community, such as Discord, for example, and obviously all of our social media. But if you want to go that extra mile, you can go directly to our Buzzsprout website page and subscribe there, or you could take those funds and get extra perks over at Patreon, where patrons like Stefan and Briar are helping the show run, and they're getting behind the scenes and early access to episodes like this one. There's a bunch of other perks that you can also take advantage of, so definitely check that out if you're interested in going beyond in your support. But the free stuff, the likes, the comments, the shares, the in-person conversations when we're at the cons, we absolutely love all of the above, so keep that going. We truly appreciate it. But this is the end of the episode. My name is MrEricAlmighty. That is my co-host, Phil the Filipino. And please don't forget, we release new episodes every Wednesday on the podcast with bonus content on platforms like TikTok. And all you gotta do is wait for it.
So, I heard you're looking for a go-to source for entertainment.
Wait for it.
Gaming?
Wait for it.
Anime?
Plus Ultra!
Mr. Eric Almighty and Phil the Filipino? Yeah, they've got you covered. And all you gotta do is wait for it. This is the Wait For It podcast.